Fear gripped Felicity Woodrow's heart as the stagecoach rattled to a stop outside Silver Creek, a dusty outpost in the Arizona Territory of 1876. The sun hung low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the barren landscape. Tonight was her wedding night, a thought that made her stomach twist into knots. She had never even met her husband-to-be, only knowing him as Mr. Edmund Blackwell, a wealthy mine owner who had purchased her through a mail-order bride arrangement her desperate father had orchestrated before his death. "End of the line, miss," the driver called, breaking into her thoughts. "Silver Creek." Felicity gathered her meager belongings, a worn carpet bag containing all that remained of her former life in Boston. At 22, she had resigned herself to this fate, knowing that without her father's gambling debts hanging over her head, she might have had a choice in whom she married. Now, she was simply property, transferred from one man to another. As she stepped down from the stagecoach, the dust immediately clung to her travel-worn skirts. Silver Creek was little more than a collection of wooden buildings straddling the main road, a general store, a saloon, and what appeared to be a small hotel. No one waited to greet her. "Mr. Blackwell sent someone for you," the driver asked, handing down her bag. "He was supposed to," Felicity replied, scanning the nearly empty street. The sun was setting fast, and she felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling desert air. "Well, I can't wait around, got a schedule to keep." The driver tipped his hat. "Good luck to you, miss." Before Felicity could protest, the stagecoach was rolling away, leaving her alone in the unfamiliar town. She stood there, uncertain what to do next, when the batwing doors of the saloon swung open and three men staggered out. Their raucous laughter died when they spotted her. "Well, look what we got here," the tallest one said, nudging his companions. "Fresh meat." Felicity clutched her bag tighter, taking a step back. The men approached, their intentions clear in their leering expressions. "You lost, pretty lady?" one asked, his breath reeking of whiskey. "I'm waiting for Mr. Blackwell," she said, trying to keep her voice steady. The men exchanged glances and the leader laughed. "Blackwell? Edmund Blackwell? Yes, do you know him?" "Oh, we know him all right," the man said, moving closer. "Blackwell's dead, sweetheart. Been dead 3 weeks now." "Mining accident." The blood drained from Felicity's face. That cannot be true." "True as I'm standing here," the man said, reaching for her arm. "But don't you worry. We can take real good care of you." Felicity tried to back away but found herself against the wall of the general store. Panic rose in her throat as the men closed in. This couldn't be happening. Not like this. "I believe the lady isn't interested in your company, gentlemen." The deep voice cut through the tension like a knife. The men turned, and Felicity peered around them to see a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun. He stepped forward, and she could make out his features' strong jawline, weathered skin, and eyes that seemed to burn with intensity even in the fading light. He wore a long duster coat, a worn Stetson hat, and at his hip rested a holstered Colt revolver. "This ain't your business, Lawson," the leader of the drunks spat. "I'm making it my business," the stranger Lawson replied calmly. His hand rested casually near his gun, but there was nothing casual about the authority in his stance. For a tense moment, Felicity thought violence would erupt. Then the leader cursed, spat in the dust, and motioned to his companions. "Come on, boys. Ain't worth the trouble." As they stumbled away, Felicity released the breath she'd been holding. The stranger Lawson approached her with careful steps, as if worried he might frighten her further. "Are you all right, madam?" he asked, his voice gentler now. "Yes, thank you," she managed, though her voice shook. "Is it true what they said about Mr. Blackwell?" A shadow passed over Lawson's face. "I'm afraid so. Edmund Blackwell died in a cave-in at his mine 3 weeks ago." The news hit Felicity like a physical blow. Her arranged marriage had been her only prospect, her only plan. Now she was stranded in a strange town with no money, no connections, and night falling fast. "I'm Lucas Lawson," the man said, breaking into her thoughts. "Town marshal here in Silver Creek." "Felicity Woodrow," she replied automatically. "I was to be. I came here to marry Blackwell," he finished for her. "You're not the first mail-order bride to arrive in these parts. I'm sorry you came all this way for nothing." Felicity fought back tears. She would not break down in front of this stranger, marshal or not. "Is there a hotel where I might stay for the night while I figure things out?" Lucas nodded. "Silver Creek Inn just down the street, but—" He hesitated. "Do you have funds for a room?" The question stung, but it was a fair one. Felicity had spent nearly everything getting here. "I have some money," she said, though it wouldn't last more than a night or two. Lucas seemed to read the uncertainty in her face. "Come with me," he said. "Mrs. Peterson at the boarding house has a spare room. She's a good woman, might be willing to let you stay while you sort things out." With no better options, Felicity followed the marshal down the dusty street. As they walked, she studied him surreptitiously. He was tall and broad-shouldered with a purposeful stride. His brown hair was a touch too long, curling slightly at the nape of his neck beneath his hat. She guessed him to be in his early 30s, with lines around his eyes that spoke of both laughter and hardship. "How long have you been marshal?" she asked, trying to distract herself from her dire situation. "Going on 5 years now," he replied. "Town wasn't much more than the saloon and general store when I started. It's grown some since the silver mine opened." "Blackwell's mine," Lucas nodded. "That's the one, biggest employer in these parts. What will happen to it now?" Felicity asked, wondering if knowing more about Blackwell's affairs might somehow help her predicament. "His foreman's running it for now. Blackwell had no family that anyone knows of. Lawyers from Tucson are coming next month to sort it all out." He glanced at her. "Did you have some correspondence with him?" "Letters. Very few," Felicity admitted. "The arrangement was made through an agency in Boston, my father." She trailed off, not wanting to explain the shameful circumstances that had led her here. They arrived at a neat 2-story house set back from the main street. A sign reading Peterson Boarding House hung by the door. Lucas knocked, and moments later, a plump, middle-aged woman with kind eyes answered. "Evening, Marshal," she said, then noticed Felicity. "Who's this, Mrs. Peterson? This is Miss Felicity Woodrow. She arrived on today's stage expecting to marry Edmund Blackwell." The woman's face fell. "Oh, you poor dear. Come in, come in." Inside, Lucas explained Felicity's situation while Mrs. Peterson made tea. The boarding house was clean and modest, with simple furnishings and the smell of fresh baking in the air. "Of course she can stay," Mrs. Peterson declared. "I've got the room at the back empty right now." "I can only pay for a night or two," Felicity admitted. "Mrs. Peterson waved a hand dismissively. "We'll work something out. I could use help with the cleaning and cooking. My arthritis makes it hard to keep up sometimes." Relief washed over Felicity. "I would be happy to help in any way I can." "It's settled then," Lucas said, rising from his chair. "Miss Woodrow, I'll check in on you tomorrow. See if we can figure out what to do about your situation." As he turned to leave, Felicity caught his arm. "Thank you, Marshal Lawson. I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't come along when you did." Something flickered in his eyes, concern, perhaps, or something deeper. "Just doing my job, madam. Get some rest. Things might look better in the morning." After he left, Mrs. Peterson showed Felicity to a small but comfortable room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking a small garden. Once alone, Felicity finally allowed the tears to come. She had traveled across the country to marry a stranger, only to find herself alone, nearly penniless, in a town where she knew no one. And tonight, what should have been her wedding night had almost ended in violence or worse. She thought of Lucas Lawson, with his calm authority and kind eyes. At least there seemed to be one decent man in Silver Creek, but she couldn't rely on the marshal's protection forever. Somehow, she would have to find her own way in this harsh new world. The following morning, Felicity woke to sunlight streaming through the window. For a moment, she was disoriented. Then the events of the previous day came rushing back. She dressed quickly in one of her 2 remaining dresses, a practical blue cotton with white piping, and made her way downstairs. Mrs. Peterson was already in the kitchen, kneading dough for bread. "Good morning, dear. Sleep well." "Yes, thank you," Felicity lied. In truth, she had tossed and turned much of the night, plagued by worries about her future. "There's coffee on the stove and porridge keeping warm," Mrs. Peterson said. "Help yourself." As Felicity ate, she asked, "What sort of work might be available in town for a woman like me?" Mrs. Peterson's hands stilled in the dough. "Well, there's the saloon, but that's no place for a respectable girl." "I can read and write well," Felicity offered. "I taught at a small school in Boston for a time." Silver Creek's got no proper school yet, though there's talk of starting one. There's about a dozen children in town now. Mrs. Peterson resumed her kneading. "The general store might need help, or perhaps doctor. Wilson could use someone to keep his books." A knock at the door interrupted their conversation. Mrs. Peterson wiped her hands on her apron and went to answer it. Moments later, she returned with Lucas Lawson in tow. "Morning, Miss Woodrow," he said, removing his hat. "Thought I'd see how you're settling in." "As well as can be expected, Marshal, thank you." Mrs. Peterson excused herself to check on her bread, leaving them alone in the small dining room. "I've been thinking about your situation," Lucas said, taking a seat across from her. "I sent a telegraph to the county seat last night. There might be some legal matters to sort out regarding Blackwell's estate." Felicity frowned. "I don't understand. We weren't married." "No, but there was a contract, I assume, and you've come all this way based on that contract." She hadn't thought of it that way. "Yes, there were papers. They're in my bag. Might be worth having a lawyer look at them, if Blackwell paid for your passage or if there were other terms." Felicity shook her head. "My father arranged everything. The agency took their fee from him before." She stopped, unwilling to explain further. Lucas studied her for a moment. "Miss Woodrow, forgive me for asking, but what would you have done if Blackwell had been alive? If the marriage had gone forward as planned?" The question caught her off guard. "I would have been his wife," she said simply. "I would have fulfilled my duties as such, even though you'd never met him. Many marriages are arranged for practical reasons, Marshal Lawson. Love is a luxury not everyone can afford." A shadow crossed his face. "That may be, but it doesn't seem right." "What doesn't seem right is finding myself stranded in a strange town with no prospects," Felicity said, more sharply than she intended. To her surprise, Lucas smiled. "You've got spirit, Miss Woodrow. That'll serve you well out here." He stood, placing his hat back on his head. "I need to make my rounds, but I'll ask around about work. In the meantime, I'll have my deputy bring over your trunk from the stage office." "My trunk?" It arrived on yesterday's stage. The driver mentioned it this morning. Relief flooded through her. The trunk contained most of her clothes and a few precious mementos, all she had left of her former life. "Thank you, Marshal." He tipped his hat. "Lucas, please. No need for formalities." After he left, Felicity helped Mrs. Peterson with the housework, grateful for the distraction. The boarding house had 3 other residents: an elderly shopkeeper named Mr. Finch, a young bank clerk called Timothy, and a widow, Mrs. Holloway, who gave piano lessons. None seemed particularly interested in Felicity's story, which suited her fine. Around midday, a gangly young man with a deputy's badge delivered her trunk. "Marshal Lawson says to tell you he's checking with Dr. Wilson about that bookkeeping job," he informed her. Felicity thanked him and spent the afternoon unpacking her belongings and helping Mrs. Peterson prepared dinner for the boarders. As they worked, the older woman shared the local gossip, giving Felicity a clearer picture of Silver Creek and its inhabitants. "The town's growing fast since the mine opened," Mrs. Peterson explained. "All sorts coming in, some good folk, some not so good. Marshal Lawson keeps order well enough, though. He seems very capable," Felicity observed. Mrs. Peterson gave her a knowing look. "Lucas is a good man. Lost his wife about 7 years back before he came here. Never remarried, though plenty have tried to catch his eye." Felicity felt an unexpected twinge of interest at this information, which she quickly suppressed. Her situation was precarious enough without developing foolish fancies about the town marshal. That evening, as Felicity sat on the porch enjoying the cooler air, she noticed a familiar figure approaching. Lucas Lawson walked with the same purposeful stride she'd observed the previous day, but without his usual duster coat. She could better appreciate his broad shoulders and trim waist. He wore a simple cotton shirt with the sleeves rolled up, revealing strong forearms tanned by the sun. "Evening, Miss Woodrow," he greeted her, removing his hat as he reached the porch steps. "Good evening, Marshal," she replied, forgetting his earlier invitation to use his given name. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the empty chair beside her. "Of course." He settled into the chair with a sigh. "Been a long day." "Your deputy mentioned you were speaking with Dr. Wilson," Lucas nodded. "He could use someone to help organize his papers and keep his accounts." "It's not much, but it would be a start. He asked if you could stop by his office tomorrow morning." Gratitude welled up inside her. "Thank you for going to the trouble." "It's no trouble," he assured her. "Small town like this, we look out for each other." They sat in companionable silence for a moment, watching as the last golden rays of sunlight painted the distant mountains. "It's beautiful here," Felicity admitted. "Different from Boston." "I imagine so," Lucas replied. "What was your life like there?" The question was asked with simple curiosity, but Felicity tensed. How much should she reveal? "I lived with my father. After my mother died when I was 16, I kept house for him and taught at a small school for girls. And then," Felicity looked down at her hands, "my father was not a practical man when it came to money. When he died 6 months ago, I discovered he had gambled away everything, including our home. There were debts." She swallowed hard. "The marriage arrangement with Mr. Blackwell was meant to settle those debts and give me a fresh start." Lucas was quiet for a long moment. "I'm sorry," he finally said. "That couldn't have been easy." "Life rarely is," she replied, forcing a smile. "But I'm here now, and it seems I must make the best of it." "Dr. Wilson is a fair man," Lucas said. "If you prove yourself useful, the position could become permanent." "I'm grateful for the opportunity." As darkness fell, Lucas stood to leave. "I should get back to my rounds. Silver Creek may be small, but there's always someone causing trouble at the saloon after dark." "Thank you again for your help," Felicity said, rising as well. In the dim light of the porch lantern, his eyes met hers. "Miss Woodrow, I hope you know that whatever happens, you're not alone here. I won't let any harm come to you." The intensity in his voice stirred something in Felicity, a feeling she didn't dare examine too closely. "That's very kind of you, Marshal." "Lucas," he reminded her gently. "Lucas," she echoed, the name feeling strangely intimate on her lips. He smiled, and for a moment, she glimpsed something beyond the lawman's composed exterior, perhaps a hint of the man he had been before grief had marked him. "Good night, Felicity," he said, placing his hat back on his head and stepping down from the porch. She watched him walk away, his silhouette gradually disappearing into the darkness. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Felicity felt a small flicker of hope. Perhaps there was a place for her here after all. The next morning, Felicity dressed with care in her best remaining dress, a modest navy blue with a lace collar, and made her way to Dr. Wilson's office. which occupied a small building near the center of town. The doctor himself was a balding man in his 50s with spectacles and a gentle manner that immediately put her at ease. "Marshall Lawson speaks highly of you, Miss Woodrow," he said after introductions were made. "Says you're educated and looking for respectable work." "That's correct, Doctor," Felicity replied. "I can read and write, and I have experience keeping accounts from helping my father with his business affairs." This wasn't entirely true. Her father had rarely allowed her near his business papers, but she had taught bookkeeping to young ladies at the school and understood the principles well enough. Dr. Wilson showed her to a small desk in the corner of his office, piled high with papers. "As you can see, I'm better at mending bones than keeping records. I need someone to organize all this, write up bills for patients, and keep track of supplies." "I can certainly do that," Felicity assured him. "The pay isn't much, $5 a week to start. Hours would be 9 till 5, Monday through Saturday." It wasn't a fortune, but it would cover her room and board at Mrs. Peterson's with a little left over. More importantly, it was respectable work that would allow her to be self-sufficient. "When would you like me to start?" she asked. "No time like the present," Dr. Wilson replied with a smile. "Think you can make sense of this mess?" Felicity surveyed the chaotic pile of papers. "I'll certainly try, Doctor." By midday, she had sorted the papers into neat stacks: patient records, supply invoices, correspondence, and financial documents. Dr. Wilson was called away to treat a minor with a crushed hand, leaving Felicity alone to continue her organizing. She was so absorbed in her work that she didn't notice the door open until a shadow fell across her desk. Looking up, she found Lucas watching her with an amused expression. "I see you've already made progress," he observed, nodding toward the ordered piles. "There's still much to do," she replied, setting down her pen. "But yes, I've made a start. Dr. Wilson was practically singing your praises when I passed him on the street, said you're a godsend." Felicity felt a blush warming her cheeks at the compliment. "That's very kind of him." "I just came by to see how you were settling in," Lucas said, "and to invite you to dinner tonight. There's a decent restaurant at the hotel, nothing fancy but better than eating alone." The invitation caught her by surprise. "Oh, that is just a meal between friends," he clarified quickly. "I thought you might appreciate a chance to get out of the boarding house." Relief and something like disappointment mingled in Felicity's chest. "That would be lovely, thank you." "I'll call for you at 7 then," Lucas said, tipping his hat and departing. Felicity stared after him, confused by her own reaction. Of course it was just a friendly gesture. He was simply being kind to a newcomer in town. It would be foolish to read anything more into it. Still, she couldn't deny the flutter of anticipation she felt at the prospect of spending an evening in his company. The afternoon passed quickly as Felicity immersed herself in her work. By the time Dr. Wilson returned, she had created a new filing system and begun transcribing his patient notes into a proper ledger. "This is remarkable," the doctor exclaimed, surveying her progress. "I had no idea it could be so organized." "I'm glad you're pleased, Doctor," Felicity replied. "Tomorrow I can begin preparing proper invoices for your patients." "Excellent, excellent. You've done enough for today, though. Go get some rest." Felicity returned to the boarding house with just enough time to freshen up before Lucas was due to arrive. She changed into her one remaining good dress, a forest green silk that she had saved for special occasions. It was a bit formal for a small-town restaurant, but it was all she had that wasn't well worn from travel. Mrs. Peterson helped her pin up her hair, her eyes twinkling with barely concealed interest. "The Marshall's a fine man," she commented as she secured a final hairpin. "Handsome, too." "It's just a friendly dinner," Felicity insisted, though her racing pulse suggested otherwise. "Of course, dear Mrs. Peterson replied, not sounding convinced. At precisely 7 o'clock, there was a knock at the door. Lucas stood on the porch, freshly shaved and wearing a clean white shirt with a dark waistcoat. He had traded his usual dusty boots for polished ones, and his hair was neatly combed. The effect was striking. He looked less like a rugged lawman and more like a gentleman caller. "Miss Woodrow," he greeted her, his eyes widening slightly as he took in her appearance. "You look lovely." "Thank you," she replied, suddenly shy. "And please call me Felicity." The Silver Creek Hotel's restaurant was small but pleasant, with tablecloths and proper silverware, clearly the finest establishment in town. Several diners looked up as they entered, curiosity evident in their expressions. Felicity was acutely aware that her appearance with the marshal would fuel local gossip, but found she didn't mind as much as she might have expected. Once they were seated, and had ordered the choices were limited to steak or chicken, Lucas leaned back in his chair, studying her. "So, how do you find Silver Creek so far?" "It's different," Felicity replied diplomatically. "Smaller than I'm used to, but the people seem kind." She paused. "Most of them, anyway." Lucas's expression darkened slightly. "Those men who accosted you when you arrived, they won't bother you again." "You spoke to them." "I did more than speak," he admitted. "But they understand now that you're under my protection." The possessive note in his voice sent an unexpected thrill through Felicity. "I appreciate that, though I hope to eventually stand on my own feet here." "Of course," Lucas agreed quickly. "And the job with Dr. Wilson is a good start. The town's growing, there will be other opportunities." Their meals arrived, and the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Lucas told her about how he'd come to Silver Creek 5 years earlier, when it was little more than a way station on the stage route. The discovery of silver had changed everything, bringing prospectors, merchants, and eventually families. "It's becoming a proper town now," he said with evident pride. "We've got a bank, a telegraph office, even talk of building a schoolhouse next year." "A school would be wonderful," Felicity said, thinking of her teaching days in Boston. "Children need education, even on the frontier." "You were a teacher, you said," she nodded. "For 3 years. I taught reading, writing, arithmetic, and a bit of history to girls aged 8 to 12. Would you consider teaching again? If the town raised the money for a school," the question caught her by surprise. I hadn't thought that far ahead, but yes, I suppose I would." Lucas smiled. "I'll mention it to Mayor Collins. He's been trying to convince the town council that we need a proper school, not just lessons in Mrs. Holloway's parlor." As they continued talking, Felicity found herself increasingly drawn to Lucas. Beyond his obvious physical appeal, there was a depth to him that intrigued her: intelligence, compassion, and a quiet strength. When he spoke of his hopes for Silver Creek's future, his face lit up with genuine passion. "You really care about this town," she observed. "I do," he admitted. "When I came here, I was lost. Silver Creek gave me purpose again." Felicity sensed there was more to the story, perhaps connected to the wife he had lost, but didn't press. Instead, she asked, "And what brought you west initially?" A shadow crossed his face. "After the war, there wasn't much left for me back east." "You fought in the war between the states," he nodded. "Union Army. 4 years that felt like 40. He fell silent for a moment, his eyes distant. "When it was over, I couldn't settle back into normal life. So I headed west, worked as a ranch hand, a surveyor, even rode shotgun for Wells Fargo for a spell. Then I landed here and became marshal," Felicity finished for him. "Previous marshal got himself shot over a card game," Lucas said with a wry smile. "Mayor asked me to pin on the badge temporarily. 5 years later, I'm still wearing it." "It suits you," Felicity told him honestly. Their eyes met across the table, and something unspoken passed between them, a moment of connection that made Felicity's breath catch in her throat. Lucas reached across the table as if to take her hand, then seemed to think better of it, withdrawing slightly. "It's getting late," he said, his voice rougher than before. "I should escort you back to Mrs. Peterson's." The evening air had cooled considerably as they walked back to the boarding house. Without a word, Lucas removed his coat and draped it over Felicity's shoulders. The wool was warm from his body and carried his scent leather, soap, and something uniquely him. "Thank you for dinner," she said as they approached Mrs. Peterson's gate. "I enjoyed our conversation." "As did I," Lucas replied. They stopped at the bottom of the porch steps, facing each other in the silvery moonlight. Felicity, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted by shouts from the direction of the saloon, followed by the unmistakable sound of a gunshot. Lucas tensed, immediately alert. "I need to go," he said, his hand moving to the revolver at his hip. "Get inside, quickly." Before Felicity could respond, he was running toward the disturbance, his tall figure soon swallowed by the darkness. She stood there for a moment, his coat still around her shoulders, concern knotting her stomach. Then, remembering his instruction, she hurried inside. Mrs. Peterson was waiting up, her knitting needles clicking rapidly as she sat in the parlor. "Was that gunfire?" she asked, looking up as Felicity entered. "Yes, from near the saloon. Lucas Marshall Lawson went to investigate." "That man earns his pay," Mrs. Peterson sighed. "Rare a week goes by without some foolishness at that saloon." She noticed the coat draped around Felicity's shoulders. "The Marshall's coat," Felicity nodded, suddenly self-conscious. "He lent it to me because of the chill." Mrs. Peterson's knowing smile made Felicity blush. "He's sweet on you," the older woman declared. "Haven't seen him look at anyone that way since he came to town." "You're mistaken," Felicity protested weakly. "He's simply being kind to a newcomer." "If you say so, dear," Mrs. Peterson replied, returning to her knitting. "Though most men don't dress up in their Sunday best for newcomers, nor stare at them like they hung the moon." Felicity fled to her room, her cheeks burning. Once alone, she carefully removed Lucas's coat, hanging it over the back of a chair. Despite Mrs. Peterson's teasing, Felicity knew she shouldn't read too much into his attentions. A man like Lucas Lawson, respected, established, could have his pick of women in Silver Creek. Why would he be interested in a penniless mail-order bride with nothing to her name? Yet as she prepared for bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the way he had looked at her across the dinner table, or the warmth in his voice when he said her name. For the first time since arriving in Silver Creek, Felicity fell asleep with a smile on her face. She woke to the sound of raised voices downstairs. Pulling on her dressing gown, she crept to the top of the stairs, where she could hear Mrs. Peterson speaking with someone. "She's still sleeping, I expect," the landlady was saying. "Poor thing was exhausted after everything." "I just wanted to make sure she got home safely," came Lucas's voice, sounding tired but relieved. "Things got chaotic last night." Felicity descended the stairs, conscious of her state of undress but unwilling to eavesdrop any longer. "Good morning," she said, drawing both their attention. Lucas looked up, surprise and something else flickering across his face. With his hat in his hands and stubble darkening his jaw, he appeared exhausted but unharmed. "Miss Woodrow, Felicity, I apologize for disturbing you so early." "Not at all," she replied. "I was concerned after hearing the gunshot. Is everyone all right?" A shadow crossed his face. "No serious injuries, thankfully. Just a dispute over cards that got out of hand. The troublemakers are sleeping it off in my jail cells." "I'm glad you weren't hurt," Felicity said softly. Their eyes met, and that same unspoken something passed between them again. Mrs. Peterson cleared her throat pointedly. "I'll just see about breakfast," she announced, retreating to the kitchen with a knowing smile. Once alone, Lucas stepped closer. "I wanted to apologize for leaving so abruptly last night." "There's no need, it's your duty." Still, it wasn't how I planned to end our evening. He hesitated, then added, I enjoyed your company, Felicity, more than I expected to. Her heart quickened at his words. As did I. Lucas opened his mouth as if to say more, then closed it again, glancing toward the kitchen door. I should let you get ready for your day. Dr. Wilson will be expecting you. Oh, Felicity had nearly forgotten her new employment. Yes, of course. I'll call on you again soon, Lucas promised, placing his hat back on his head. Perhaps Sunday after church. We could go for a ride if you'd like to see more of the countryside. I'd like that very much, Felicity replied, unable to keep the pleasure from her voice. After he left, she hurried back upstairs to dress, her mind spinning with the implications of his invitation. It sounded very much like a proper courting, something she had never expected to experience in Silver Creek. Over the next few days, Felicity settled into a routine. Her mornings and afternoons were spent at Dr. Wilson's office, organizing his practice and learning about the various ailments that afflicted the residents of Silver Creek. The evenings she spent at the boarding house, helping Mrs. Peterson with dinner and getting to know the other boarders. Lucas stopped by briefly each day, sometimes just to tip his hat as he passed on his rounds, other times staying for a cup of coffee and conversation on the porch. Each encounter left Felicity more intrigued by the marshal. There was a gentleness to him that contrasted with his imposing physical presence, a thoughtfulness that suggested a man of deeper waters than most in Silver Creek. And though she tried to guard her heart, she found herself looking forward to his visits with increasing anticipation. On Sunday morning, Felicity dressed with special care for church services, which were held in a small white building at the edge of town. The congregation was modest but welcoming, and Felicity found herself introduced to what seemed like half the town. Lucas sat beside her during the service, their shoulders occasionally brushing in the crowded pew. Afterward, as promised, he had 2 horses waiting for their ride. Felicity was grateful she had packed her riding habit, a practical dark blue wool that allowed her to ride astride if necessary. I thought we might ride out to Blackwell's claim, Lucas said as they set off. It's about an hour's ride. The countryside is beautiful and it might give you some closure to see what would have been your home. The suggestion was unexpectedly thoughtful. I'd like that, Felicity agreed. They rode at a leisurely pace through the desert landscape. Spring had brought a surprising amount of color to what Felicity had initially perceived as barren terrain. Yellow wildflowers dotted the plains, and the distant mountains were draped in a purple haze. Lucas pointed out landmarks and shared stories about the area's history, including tales of the Apache tribes who had once controlled these lands. Do they still come through here? Felicity asked, somewhat nervously. Occasionally, but there's been peace for several years now, Lucas assured her. The reservation is further north. Most of the trouble these days comes from our own kind, claim jumpers, bandits, men who have had too much to drink. As they rode, Felicity found herself opening up about her life in Boston, her mother's early death, her father's gradual descent into gambling and drinking, her efforts to maintain a respectable facade while their finances crumbled around them. It was liberating to speak honestly about her past after years of keeping up appearances. Lucas listened without judgment, occasionally asking questions that showed genuine interest. In turn, he shared more of his own story, his childhood in Pennsylvania, his service during the war, and eventually, the tragedy that had sent him west. Lillian, my wife, died of typhoid fever 7 years ago, he said, his voice quiet but steady. We'd been married just 3 years. After she was gone, I couldn't bear to stay in our hometown where everything reminded me of her, so I headed west, thinking I might outrun the memories. And did you? Felicity asked gently. Lucas shook his head. You can't outrun grief, but out here I found a way to live with it. To build something new. The rawness of his admission touched Felicity deeply. "I'm sorry for your loss, Lucas." "It was a long time ago," he replied. Then, with a slight smile, he added, "But thank you. It's been years since I've spoken of Lillian to anyone." They crested a rise, and below them lay a small valley. A sturdy log cabin stood near a stream, with several outbuildings and corrals nearby. Beyond these was the entrance to a mine shaft, with ore carts and machinery scattered around. "Blackwell's place," Lucas announced. "One of the better homesteads in the area. He built it all in the last 2 years, after the silver strike." Felicity studied what would have been her home with mixed emotions. The cabin looked comfortable enough, certainly more substantial than many dwellings she had seen in Silver Creek. But the isolation was striking nothing but wilderness in all directions. What was he like? She asked, realizing she knew almost nothing about the man she had traveled so far to marry. Lucas considered the question. Driven, not particularly friendly but fair in his dealings. He worked alongside his men in the early days before the mine started producing. Never saw him socialize much in town. "Do you know why he sent for a bride?" "Can't say for certain," Lucas replied, "but a man gets lonely out here. And he was building something he probably wanted to pass on someday." They dismounted and walked around the property. The cabin was locked, but through the windows, Felicity could see simple but solid furnishings: a table with chairs, a stone fireplace, shelves with books and dishes. "What will happen to it all?" she asked. "As I said, lawyers are coming next month to sort through Blackwell's affairs. From what I understand, he had no family. The mine will likely be sold to investors from back east." Lucas paused. "There might be something in his will about you, given the arrangement." Felicity shook her head. "I doubt it. The contract was with the agency, not directly with me, and we never met." They remounted and began the ride back to town, the sun now high overhead. As they traveled, Felicity found herself grateful for the twist of fate that had brought her to Silver Creek, too late to marry Edmund Blackwell. The life she would have led as his wife, isolated in that cabin, married to a stranger who sounded cold and distant, seemed far less appealing than the possibilities that now lay before her. And much of that had to do with the man riding beside her. In just a few days, Lucas Lawson had shown her more kindness and consideration than she had experienced in years. There was something growing between them, something that frightened and exhilarated her in equal measure. As they neared town, Lucas suggested they stop by the stream that ran along the valley edge. They dismounted, and he spread his coat on the grass for them to sit on. From his saddlebag, he produced a small parcel of bread, cheese, and dried fruit, a simple but welcome meal after their long ride. "I've been thinking," Lucas said as they ate, "about what you said regarding teaching. Mayor Collins is keen on the idea of hiring a proper teacher for the town children. It wouldn't pay much at first, but—" "Are you offering me a position?" Felicity asked, surprised. "Not officially, that would be up to the town council. But I've spoken with several of the council members, and they're interested in meeting with you to discuss the possibility." Hope bloomed in Felicity's chest. Teaching again, doing something she loved and was skilled at, would give her a true purpose in Silver Creek. "I would very much like to meet with them," she said eagerly. Lucas smiled, clearly pleased by her reaction. "I'll arrange it then." They finished their meal in companionable silence, watching the play of sunlight on the water. When it was time to leave, Lucas helped Felicity to her feet, his hands lingering on her waist longer than strictly necessary. The warmth of his touch sent a thrill through her, and she found herself looking up into his eyes, unable to look away. For a breathless moment, she thought he might kiss her. His gaze dropped to her lips, and he leaned slightly closer. Then, with visible effort, he stepped back, clearing his throat. "We should head back," he said, his voice rougher than usual. "It'll be dark soon." The ride back to town was quieter, a new tension humming between them. When they reached Mrs. Peterson's boarding house, Lucas helped Felicity dismount, his hands strong and sure around her waist. "Thank you for today," she said, reluctant for their time together to end. "My pleasure," he replied, his eyes soft in the fading light. Felicity, whatever he had been about to say was interrupted yet again, this time by Mrs. Peterson calling from the porch. "There you are. I was beginning to worry. Dinner's nearly ready and you have a visitor waiting in the parlor." "A visitor?" Felicity asked, puzzled. She knew almost no one in town. "Says he's a lawyer from Tucson," Mrs. Peterson explained. "Something about Mr. Blackwell's estate." Felicity and Lucas exchanged surprised glances. "I'll come with you," he offered, tying both horses to the hitching post. The visitor proved to be a thin, nervous-looking man with spectacles and a leather portfolio. He introduced himself as Mr. Jenkins, representing the law firm handling Edmund Blackwell's affairs. "Miss Woodrow," he began after introductions were made, "I understand you were contracted to marry the late Mr. Blackwell." "That's correct," Felicity confirmed, feeling Lucas's supportive presence beside her. "You have documentation of this arrangement." Felicity retrieved the contract from her trunk, a formal document outlining the terms of the marriage arrangement, including the payment her father had received from the agency to settle his debts. Mr. Jenkins examined it carefully. "This appears to be in order. Miss Woodrow, I am here to inform you that Mr. Blackwell made provisions for his future bride in his will." Felicity stared at him in disbelief. "But we never met. He didn't even know my name." Nevertheless, his will specified that should he die before his bride arrived, she would inherit the cabin and surrounding land, approximately 50 acres. The silver mine and its operations were bequeathed separately to his business partners. The news was so unexpected that Felicity could only gape at the lawyer. I don't understand. Why would he do that?" Mr. Jenkins adjusted his spectacles. "I cannot speak to Mr. Blackwell's motivations, madam. I am merely executing his wishes. The property is legally yours should you choose to accept it." "And if I don't?" Felicity asked, finding her voice. "Then it would be sold and the proceeds added to the rest of the estate." Lucas, who had been silent until now, spoke up. "Miss Woodrow will need time to consider this development, Mr. Jenkins." The lawyer nodded. "Of course. I'll remain in town for 3 days while we sort out other aspects of the estate. You can inform me of your decision then." He handed Felicity a sealed envelope. "The deed to the property. You'll need to sign some papers if you decide to accept the inheritance." After Mr. Jenkins departed, Felicity sank into a chair, the envelope clutched in her trembling hands. "I own property," she said, the words sounding strange to her ears. Lucas knelt beside her chair. "It appears you do. If you want it." "I don't know what to think," she admitted. "It seems wrong somehow to accept such a gift from a man I never even met." "He made the choice freely," Lucas pointed out, "and it was meant for his bride, which you would have been had circumstances been different." Felicity looked down at the envelope. "The cabin is lovely, but it's so isolated. What would I do out there alone?" Lucas covered her hand with his. "You don't have to decide anything tonight. Take some time to think about it." Later that evening, after a mostly silent dinner with the other boarders, Felicity sat alone on the porch, turning the envelope over and over in her hands. The deed represented security, something she had lacked since her father's death. With property of her own, she would no longer be dependent on the charity of others or worried about her next meal. Yet the thought of living alone in that remote cabin filled her with dread. And there was another consideration now: her growing feelings for Lucas, and the possibility of a future in Silver Creek that had nothing to do with Edmund Blackwell or his legacy. The creak of the porch step announced Lucas's return. He had gone to escort Mr. Jenkins to the hotel but promised to come back afterward, still wrestling with your decision, he asked, taking the seat beside her. Felicity nodded. It's not a simple choice. Few important ones are, Lucas agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, There's something I need to tell you. About Blackwell. Something in his tone made Felicity tense. What is it? Lucas sighed, removing his hat and running a hand through his hair. The mining accident that killed him. It wasn't exactly an accident. What do you mean? Blackwell had made enemies. He wasn't well liked by his workers, drove them hard, paid them little. The cave-in that killed him was deliberately caused. Felicity gasped. You mean he was murdered? That's my belief, yes. I haven't been able to prove it, but several miners disappeared right after his death. Men who had argued with him publicly. Lucas's expression was grim. I'm telling you this because if you accept that property, you might be putting yourself in danger. Whoever killed Blackwell might not take kindly to his widow or almost widow taking possession. The revelation sent a chill through Felicity. You think someone might try to harm me if I claim the cabin? I think it's a possibility we can't ignore, Lucas admitted. Especially if you were living out there alone. Felicity's mind raced. But why would anyone care? The mine is going to his business partners, not to me. The cabin sits on land that might contain more silver deposits, Lucas explained. There's been talk that Blackwell was planning to expand his operation. If that's true, that 50 acres could be worth a fortune. The notion that she might be in danger changed everything. Felicity had come west seeking security, not to place herself in the path of murderers. What should I do? She asked, hating how vulnerable she sounded. Lucas reached for her hand, his warm fingers closing around hers. I can't make that decision for you, Felicity, but know this: whatever you choose, I'll protect you. The conviction in his voice sent warmth spreading through her. Thank you, Lucas. They sat in silence for a while, his hand still holding hers. Finally, Lucas spoke again, his voice lower, more hesitant than she had ever heard it. There's another option you might consider. What's that? He turned to face her fully, his eyes intense in the lantern light. Marry me. The words hung in the air between them, stunning Felicity into silence. Of all the things she had expected him to say, this was not among them. Lucas, hear me out, he said quickly. I know it's sudden. We've known each other less than a week, but there's something between us. I know you feel it too. Felicity couldn't deny it. From their first meeting, there had been a connection that went beyond mere attraction or gratitude. As my wife, Lucas continued, you'd be safer. We could claim the property together, sell it if that's what you want, or keep it for the future. You could still teach, still have your independence, but you wouldn't be facing this alone. His proposal was practical, protective, but was there more to it? Felicity searched his face. Is that the only reason you're asking? For my safety? Lucas's expression softened. No, Felicity. It's not the only reason. He reached up to touch her cheek gently. I've been alone a long time. I never expected to feel this way again after Lillian died. But from the moment I saw you standing there in the street, so brave despite everything, something changed for me. His honesty took her breath away. Lucas, this is all happening so fast. I know, he acknowledged. And I'm not asking for an answer tonight. Take some time to think about it, just as you're considering Blackwell's property. But know that my offer comes from my heart, not just my concern for your welfare. Felicity nodded, overwhelmed by the evening's revelations. I will think about it, she promised. Lucas lifted her hand to his lips, pressing a gentle kiss to her knuckles. That's all I ask. He left her there on the porch, her mind and heart in turmoil. In less than a week, her life had transformed completely. She had arrived in Silver Creek, expecting to become the wife of a stranger, only to find herself with unexpected choices, a property of her own, the possibility of teaching again. And now, A marriage proposal from a man who stirred feelings in her that she had never experienced before. That night, sleep eluded her as she weighed her options. By morning, she had made her decision. After breakfast, Felicity asked Mrs. Peterson if she might borrow paper and pen to write a letter. Once it was completed, she sealed it and set out for the marshal's office. Lucas was at his desk, reviewing wanted posters when she entered. He looked up, surprise and pleasure lighting his features. "Felicity, I wasn't expecting to see you this morning." "I've made my decision," she said without preamble, "about the property and about your proposal." Lucas set down the papers and stood, his expression guarded. And Felicity took a deep breath. "I will accept the property, but not to live there, at least not alone." And she swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "I will marry you, Lucas, if you still want me." The caution in his face gave way to a smile that transformed his features. In 2 strides, he was around the desk and standing before her, his hands coming up to frame her face. "Are you certain?" he asked, his voice rough with emotion. "I don't want you to feel pressured." "I'm certain," Felicity replied, finding strength in the rightness of her decision. "It may be fast, but life out here doesn't always follow the same rules as Boston. And I trust you, Lucas. I trust what I feel when I'm with you." With a groan, Lucas pulled her into his arms, his lips finding hers in a kiss that started gentle but quickly deepened with a hunger that surprised them both. Felicity melted against him, her arms winding around his neck as she returned his kiss with equal fervor. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Lucas rested his forehead against hers. "I never thought I'd find this again," he murmured. "Never thought I'd want to." Felicity understood. This wasn't a convenient arrangement or a marriage of necessity, it was the beginning of something genuine and precious. "When?" she asked simply. "As soon as you're ready," Lucas replied. "Tomorrow, next week, next month, it's your choice, Felicity. Everything from now on is your choice." The word struck a chord deep within her. Choice, something she had been denied for so long. First under her father's control, then trapped by his debts, then sent across the country to marry a stranger. But now, finally, her life was truly her own to shape. Next Sunday, she decided. After church, a simple ceremony with the town as our witnesses, Lucas nodded, his smile widening. "Next Sunday it is." He kissed her again, more gently this time. "I have something for you." Releasing her, he went to his desk drawer and removed a small box. "It was my mother's," he said, opening it to reveal a simple gold band with a small pearl. "It's not fancy, but it's perfect," Felicity assured him, holding out her hand so he could slip it onto her finger. The ring fit as if made for her. The news of their engagement spread through Silver Creek like wildfire. Mrs. Peterson was delighted, claiming she had predicted it from the start. Dr. Wilson offered his congratulations and insisted Felicity could continue working for him as long as she wished, even after she was married. The town council, led by Mayor Collins, formally offered her the position of schoolteacher, to begin after the schoolhouse was completed in the fall. Mr. Jenkins was surprised by the turn of events, but processed the paperwork for Felicity to claim Blackwell's property without complications. When she explained that she and Lucas would be married within the week, the lawyer nodded approvingly. "A wise decision," he commented. "The property will be more secure with a marshal as co-owner." He hesitated, then added, "Miss Woodrow, I feel I should mention. There have been inquiries about the Blackwell property from mining interests in San Francisco. They seem to believe the land contains significant silver deposits." Lucas, who had accompanied Felicity to the meeting, exchanged a glance with her. "What sort of inquiries?" he asked. "Offers to purchase, primarily. Rather substantial offers, I might add." This confirmed Lucas's suspicion that the land was valuable beyond its apparent worth. "Thank you for the information," he told Jenkins. "We'll take it under advisement." Later, as they walked back to the boarding house, Felicity asked, "Should we sell? If the land is valuable enough to attract interest from San Francisco," Lucas considered the question. "It's your property, Felicity. The decision is yours." "Ours," she corrected him. "Once we're married, it will be ours. And I want your counsel." He smiled at her correction. "My counsel is to wait, see what develops. If there's silver on that land, it's not going anywhere, and we might want that cabin someday, even if we live in town for now." The idea of a future together, children running around that sturdy cabin, a life built with this good man, filled Felicity with joy. "I agree," she said. "We'll wait." The days leading up to their wedding passed in a blur of preparations. Silver Creek embraced the occasion with enthusiasm. It had been years since the town had celebrated a wedding. Mrs. Peterson and the other women organized a small gathering after the ceremony, while the men arranged for the church to be decorated with wildflowers from the surrounding countryside. On the morning of her wedding day, Felicity woke with a sense of peace that surprised her. There were no last-minute doubts, no fears about the steps she was taking. She had come to Silver Creek expecting one future and found another one infinitely more promising than she could have imagined. Mrs. Peterson helped her dress in her best gown, which had been carefully altered and adorned with lace from the general store to serve as a wedding dress. Her hair was arranged in soft curls, with wildflowers woven through the golden strands. "You look beautiful, dear," Mrs. Peterson said, tears in her eyes. "The marshal won't know what hit him." Felicity smiled, touching the older woman's hand gratefully. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Peterson, for taking me in when I had nowhere else to go." "Nonsense," the landlady replied briskly, though her eyes remained damp. "It's been a joy having you here, though I'll miss you terribly once you move to the marshal's house." The church was filled to capacity when Felicity arrived. Lucas stood at the altar, looking handsome and somewhat nervous in a new suit. His face lit up when he saw her, his eyes never leaving her as she walked down the aisle alone. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, Lucas cupped Felicity's face in his hands and kissed her with such tenderness that several women in the congregation dabbed at their eyes. The celebration afterward was joyous. Silver Creek's residents welcomed their new schoolteacher, and the marshal's bride with open arms. There was music, dancing, and enough food to feed twice their number. Through it all, Lucas kept Felicity close, his hand often finding hers, his eyes seeking her out whenever they were separated. As the sun began to set, they slipped away from the celebration and walked to Lucas's house, now their home at the edge of town. It was a modest but comfortable dwelling, with a parlor, kitchen, 2 bedrooms, and a small study. Lucas had spent the past week making improvements: new curtains at the windows, fresh paint on the walls, and flowers on the table. "Welcome home, Mrs. Lawson," he said, lifting her into his arms to carry her across the threshold. Felicity laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. "It's perfect, Lucas." He set her down gently in the parlor, his expression growing serious. "Felicity, there's something I want you to know before tonight." She felt a flutter of nervousness. "What is it?" Taking her hands in his, Lucas looked into her eyes. "I know why you came to Silver Creek: to marry a man you'd never met, to fulfill a contract. Your first night as a wife would have been with a stranger, out of obligation, not choice." Felicity swallowed hard, remembering the fear she had felt on the stagecoach, knowing what awaited her at the end of her journey. "I want you to know," Lucas continued, his voice gentle, "that tonight and every night hereafter is yours to choose. I will never take what isn't freely given." Tears welled in Felicity's eyes at his words. "Lucas, I love you, Felicity," he said simply. "I think I started falling in love with you the moment I saw you standing up to those drunks in the street, and I want our marriage to be built on that love, not on obligation or necessity." Felicity reached up to touch his face, her heart so full it might burst. "I love you too," she whispered. "And I choose you, Lucas Lawson, tonight and all the nights to come." He kissed her then, a kiss that spoke of passion restrained, of desire and tenderness intermingled. When they broke apart, both breathless, Felicity took his hand and led him toward the bedroom, their bedroom, her choice made clear in the love shining in her eyes. Later, as they lay tangled in each other's arms, the silver moonlight streaming through the window, Felicity marveled at the journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Silver Creek expecting her first night as a wife to be one of fear and submission. Instead, she had found a man who gave her back that night as a choice, a gift of love freely given and joyfully received. "What are you thinking?" Lucas murmured, his fingers tracing patterns on her bare shoulder. Felicity smiled, pressing closer to him. "I'm thinking about choices. About how sometimes the paths we don't choose lead us exactly where we're meant to be." Lucas kissed her forehead gently. "I'm grateful for whatever path brought you to me." "As am I," Felicity replied, her heart full of certainty. Silver Creek had given her more than refuge, it had given her a home, a purpose, and a love she had never dared to dream possible. In the weeks and months that followed, Felicity and Lucas settled into married life with a happiness that seemed to grow with each passing day. The schoolhouse was completed faster than expected, and by late summer, Felicity was teaching a dozen eager children, the sons and daughters of miners, merchants, and ranchers who had settled in Silver Creek. They visited the Blackwell property occasionally, picnicking by the stream and discussing plans for its future. When winter came, they celebrated their first Christmas together in their cozy home, surrounded by friends who had become like family. And when spring returned to the desert, bringing wildflowers and warm breezes, Felicity shared the news that their family would be growing, a child would arrive before the year's end. Lucas's joy at the prospect of fatherhood was boundless. He built a cradle with his own hands and spent evenings reading to Felicity's growing belly, his deep voice soothing both mother and unborn child. The town celebrated the news with them, Mrs. Peterson already planning a quilting circle to make blankets for the baby. On a crisp autumn day, with golden leaves drifting on the breeze, Felicity gave birth to a daughter, Lillian Rose Lawson, named for the wife Lucas had lost, and the new life they had built together. As they held their child between them, marveling at her tiny perfection, Felicity thought again of the strange twists of fate that had brought her to this moment. "She's beautiful," Lucas whispered, one finger gently stroking their daughter's cheek. "Like her mother." Felicity smiled up at him, exhausted but radiant. "She has your eyes. And your strength," Lucas added. "She'll need it growing up out here." "She'll have everything she needs," Felicity assured him, "including the freedom to make her own choices when the time comes." Lucas nodded, understanding the gift they both valued above all others. Always. As Lillian grew, so did Silver Creek. The town flourished, with new businesses opening and more families settling in the area. Lucas continued as marshal, respected and admired by all. Felicity's school expanded, eventually requiring a second teacher to accommodate the growing number of children. They never sold the Blackwell property. Instead, they built a small summer cabin near the original house, where they spent peaceful weeks during the school holidays. The land did indeed contain silver, though not in the quantities the San Francisco interests had hoped. It was enough, however, to provide a comfortable nest egg for their children's future. For Lillian was joined, 2 years later, by a brother, Thomas Lucas Lawson, with his father's quiet determination and his mother's curious mind. And 3 years after that, another daughter completed their family, a leaner Faith, the most adventurous of the three. Through the years, through joys and sorrows, triumphs and challenges, Lucas and Felicity's love remained the foundation upon which they built their life together. And on quiet evenings, when the children were asleep, and they sat together on the porch, watching the stars emerge in the desert sky, Felicity would sometimes think about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach, expecting a life of obligation and submission. "What are you smiling about?" Lucas would ask, his hand finding hers in the darkness, and Felicity would squeeze his fingers, grateful beyond words for the man who had given her back the power to choose. "Just counting my blessings," she would reply, and finding them too numerous to count.